How y'all doing? So today I'm going to be going over the book The Body Keeps the Score. It's by Bessel Kolk. We're going to be going through chapters 1 through 6 today. A little bit about the book is The Body Keeps the Score is a transformative guide to understanding trauma and its impact. Based on the author's decades of experience as a researcher and clinician, this book highlights the physical and emotional effects of trauma and potential treatments. This book includes description of difficult topics including sexual assault, physical and emotional abuse, and other traumatic experiences. So I found this to be a really great book. It was recommended to me by one of my coaches, and I'm going to be using the app Lucid, which is basically a visual learning app, to describe the book. So I hope you enjoy. And so today, we're going to talk about Chapter 1, Trauma Today. The Body Keeps the Score is a book about the physical and emotional effects of trauma. It discusses trauma regarding assault, abuse, and other difficult experiences. Most of us see trauma as something that happens to other people. We associate it with soldiers, prisoners of war, and refugees. But the truth is, trauma can impact us all. Trauma is an emotional response to an extreme moment of stress and pain, causing long-term psychological and physical damage. Even if we haven't experienced trauma ourselves, we likely know someone who has been impacted by their pain. Contemporary research conducted by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention and others point to the stark reality of trauma in the United States. 1 in 5 children have been sexually molested. 12 million women have been victims of rape. 1 in 3 couples engage in physical violence. 25% of Americans grew up with an alcoholic parent. Most Americans have experienced a violent crime during their lifetime. Trauma. Despite sometimes being perceived as rare, trauma is a prevalent issue in contemporary society that can impact all of us. Psychiatrist Bessel Kolk, researcher and author of The Body Keeps the Score, has dedicated his career to exploring the impact of trauma. Despite its prevalence, post-traumatic stress disorder, a mental health condition triggered by trauma, and its treatment are a relatively novel field of study. Substance abuse, you have a lot of books. Depression, you have a lot of books. Schizophrenia, you have a lot of research. PTSD, not as much. When Kolk first started working with traumatized individuals, veterans in the 1970s, little to no literature existed to rely on. Even with the lack of empirical evidence, Kolk noticed these certain commonalities among the veterans early on. Most of them reported feeling numb, incapable of emotionally engaging with other people. They also seemed unable to escape from the traumatic events they had experienced, and this distorted sense of reality stopped them from living in the present. They experienced numbness, detachment, distorted reality. To show how deeply trauma can shape perception, Kolk shares what veterans tended to see in random ink blocks, an exercise called the Rorschach test. Some veterans would immediately experience flashbacks, describing dismembering limbs or lost comrades. Others would see nothing at all. This led Kolk to realize victims of trauma are trapped inside it. They superimpose it on everything they see. This entrapment causes them to lose their ability to use their imagination. This loss is debilitating. Imagination is what lets us dream and hope for a better future. During this time, Kolk and his colleagues diagnosed veterans with a myriad of conditions, including substance abuse and depression. Few improved with treatments for these incorrect diagnoses. Luckily, in the 1980s, there was a turning point. A group of veterans and psychiatrists lobbied for the term PTSD to be accepted by the American Psychiatric Association. The recognition of PTSD, combined with emerging tools that allowed scientists to see the effects of trauma on the brain, led to a new wave of research. Today, we know that trauma causes hypervigilance to threat and increases stress hormones, and makes it hard to separate relevant from irrelevant information. This knowledge has given clinicians insight into how trauma changes the brain and how best to treat it. In the following chapters, we'll explore the science of trauma, how it can lead to loss of sense of self, and why regaining control of your body can help. Although sometimes perceived as rare, trauma is likely to have impacted us all. Trauma is an emotional response to extreme moments of stress and pain, causing long-term physical and emotional damage. Trauma causes increased response to threat and more stress hormones. So now we're going to talk about Chapter 2, the inescapable nature of trauma. Soon after the invention of brain imaging technology, Kolk and his colleague, Scott Rauch, used it to explore long-term effects of trauma on the mind. In their experiments, participants were asked to lie in a brain scanner while listening to a recorded script detailing a traumatic event they had experienced. While in scanners, participants also had their temperature, heart rate, and other physiological indicators measured. One participant, named Marcia, had a particularly shocking reaction to the experiment. Her script described a car accident from 13 years ago, in which her daughter and unborn child had died. The second the recording started to play, Marcia had a physical reaction. Her heart raced and blood pressure jumped. Her brain activity was also being measured. After the experiments concluded, Rauch created composite images that compared the brain in a neural state versus the brain while listening to the script. These brain images led to a few crucial discoveries. First, activity in the Broca's area, which processes language, was reduced while participants listened to their trauma. The effect is similar to the aftermath of a stroke. Without a functioning Broca's, you cannot put your thoughts and feelings into words, Kolk says. This explains why, even years later, traumatized individuals struggle to describe what happened to them. While brain activity decreased in the Broca's area, it increased in another brain region, Brodmann's area 19, which processes images when they're first seen. Kolk explains why this is incredibly unusual. Normally, this area only processes new images and quickly diffuses them to other areas of the brain. The activity in this area suggests that we were witnessing a brain region rekindling as if the trauma were actually occurring, van der Kolk explains. Another finding further corroborated this. During their flashbacks, participants saw increased activity in the right hemisphere and decreased in the left. Van der Kolk explains that the right region of the brain is intuitive, emotional, visual, spatial, and tactical, while the left is linguistic, sequential, and analytical. The deactivation of the left side affects a person's ability to organize experiences into logical sequences. Without sequencing, we can't identify cause and effect, grasp the long-term effects of our actions, or create coherent plans for the future, van der Kolk says. Thus, with little aid from the left side, individuals couldn't place their experience in time. It was as if they were trapped in their trauma. Effects of trauma on the brain. Decreased activity in the Broca's area, which processes language. Increased activity in Brodmann area 19, which processes new images. Increased activity in the right hemisphere, which is emotional and visual. Decreased activity in the left hemisphere, which is sequential and analytical. The result of this experiment helps us understand better why Marcia reacted so strongly to the recording. When other people's bodies perceive a threat, they release stress hormones. Then when there is no threat longer there, these hormones dissipate. For a traumatized person like Marcia, this isn't the case. When they encounter anything related to their trauma, their brain reacts differently. Their amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, reacts as though they were reliving the event by triggering the release of stress hormones. Stress hormones take much longer to dissipate in a traumatized person and are often triggered by something small. This is what happened to Marcia in the scanner. Constantly elevated stress hormones can cause long-term damage, including problems with memory, attention, mood, and sleep. The traumatized brain. When a traumatized brain and there's a memory of a traumatic event, the psychological effects of trauma can cause people to constantly relive their traumatic experiences as if for the first time. The main ideas of Chapter 2. The body's response to trauma can cause individuals to constantly relive their traumatic experiences. Trauma leads to decreased activity in the Broca area, which processes language. Trauma makes it difficult for our brains to organize experiences into a logical sequence.